So, have you ever left your keys in the fridge? Or, confidently driven past your exit on the highway while deep in thought? Or maybe you've sent a text to the exact person you were talking about in that text. If so, congratulations! You are a functioning human being. We all make mistakes, from the tiny and mundane to the genuinely catastrophic. It's a fundamental, if sometimes frustrating, part of our shared human experience. But have you ever stopped to wonder why? Why are our brains, these incredible supercomputers capable of composing symphonies and sending robots to Mars, so spectacularly good at messing things up? It's a question that has fascinated thinkers for centuries, and it's at the very heart of our video today. We're going to dive deep into the architecture of human error, guided by the brilliant insights from Joseph T. Hallinan book, Why We Make Mistakes. This isn't about blaming ourselves or feeling bad about our slip-ups. Instead, it's an exploration, a kind of intellectual adventure into the very wiring of our minds. Hallinan pulls back the curtain on the hidden biases, the mental shortcuts, and the environmental triggers that lead us astray. It turns out that many of our mistakes aren't random acts of carelessness. They are predictable patterns, glitches in the system that we can actually learn to anticipate, and to some extent, even outsmart. So, get ready. Over the next few minutes, we're going to break down the 5 key reasons we're all so perfectly imperfect. We'll look at why we think we're better than we are, how our expectations literally blind us to reality, why our memories are more like impressionist paintings than high-definition photographs, how our helpful habits can turn against us, and how the world around us is often designed to make us fail. By the end, you won't just understand your own mistakes better. You'll understand what it means to be human a little better too. And that, to me, is an incredibly worthwhile endeavor. Let's start with a foundational truth that is both universally human and, honestly, a little bit awkward to admit. We all suffer from a touch of what psychologists call illusory superiority. It's the reason why, for instance, a vast majority of drivers, something like 93% in one famous American study, rate themselves as above average. Now, unless you've been living in a world with some very, very strange statistical laws, that is mathematically impossible. We can't all be better than the average. This isn't just about driving, it extends to our intelligence, our sense of humor, our professional skills, you name it. We have a built-in feel-good bias that paints a slightly rosier picture of our own abilities than reality might warrant. It's a cognitive cushion that protects our ego, but it's also a massive blind spot. This overconfidence isn't just a harmless bit of self-flattery, it's a primary engine for error. When we overestimate our abilities, we underestimate the difficulty of a task. We think we don't need to double-check our work because, hey, we're pretty smart, we probably got it right the first time. We decide against reading the instructions for that new piece of furniture because we're good at this stuff. This leads us to take on more risk than is wise and to prepare less than is necessary. The expert skier who attempts a dangerous black diamond run without checking the conditions, or the student who barely studies for an exam because they aced the last one. These are classic examples of overconfidence setting a trap that we willingly walk into. And here's the really tricky part. This bias is often strongest in the areas where we are least competent. This is known as the Dunning-Kruger effect. The skills required to be good at something are often the very same skills required to recognize how good you are at it. So people with very little knowledge on a subject don't just lack the expertise. They lack the metacognitive ability to even realize how much they don't know. They exist in a state of unconscious incompetence, a dangerous bubble of self-assurance that makes them profoundly vulnerable to making significant and sometimes public mistakes. Recognizing this universal human tendency to see ourselves through rose-tinted glasses is the first crucial step toward a more humble and more accurate approach to the world. Our brains are, at their core, magnificent pattern recognition machines. From the moment we're born, we are constantly scanning the world, connecting dots, and creating mental models to make sense of the overwhelming flood of sensory information. This is an incredibly efficient survival mechanism. It allows us to see a few lines and shapes and immediately recognize it as a chair, or hear a few notes and identify our favorite song. We don't have to analyze every single piece of data from scratch every single time. Our brain takes shortcuts, filling in the blanks based on past experiences and current expectations. This is what Hallinan talks about when he says, "We see what we expect to see." But this incredible efficiency comes at a cost, and that cost is accuracy. This tendency creates a phenomenon known as inattentional blindness. The most famous demonstration of this is the invisible gorilla experiment. In it, viewers are asked to count the number of basketball passes made by a team in white shirts. While they are intensely focused on this task, a person in a full gorilla costume walks into the middle of the scene, thumps their chest, and walks off. A shocking number of people, around half, completely fail to see the gorilla. It's not that their eyes didn't register it, it's that their brain, focused on the expected task of counting passes, filtered the unexpected gorilla out as irrelevant noise. This isn't a failure of vision, it's a failure of attention driven by expectation. We miss what we're not looking for. This principle plays out in our lives constantly. It's why proofreaders can read the same sentence 5 times and still miss a glaring typo. Their brain sees the word as it should be, not as it is. It's why an experienced radiologist might miss an anomaly on an X-ray if it appears in an unusual location, because their trained eye is scanning for problems in the expected places. Our brains are not passive cameras recording reality. They are active interpreters, co-creating our perception of the world. This means that our reality is always, to some degree, a construction of our own minds. And when our expectations are rigid or our focus is too narrow, we create blind spots where crucial details, and sometimes chest-thumping gorillas, can hide in plain sight. We tend to think of our memory as a video recorder, a faithful archive of our past experiences that we can rewind and play back at will. We say things like, "I remember it like it was yesterday," which kind of implies a perfect, high-fidelity recording. But, decades of cognitive science have shown this metaphor to be profoundly wrong. Our memory isn't a recording device, it's a reconstruction device. Every time we recall a memory, we're not just playing it back, we're actually rebuilding it from fragments of information. And in doing so, we can, and honestly, we do change it. The act of remembering is really an act of creation, and it's susceptible to all sorts of errors. This process of reconstruction is influenced by a whole bunch of factors. Our current mood, the questions we're asked, and even information we've learned since the event can all become woven into the fabric of the original memory. This is called the misinformation effect. That's why eyewitness testimony, which used to be considered the gold standard in courtrooms, is now understood to be pretty notoriously fallible. For example, a lawyer asking, "How fast was the car going when it smashed into the other vehicle?" is way more likely to get a memory of higher speed and broken glass than if they had just asked how fast it was going when it contacted the other vehicle. The new information, the word smashed, actually retroactively alters the memory itself. And, to make things even trickier, factors like stress and repetition can paradoxically make our memories less accurate. Intense stress can mess with the brain's ability to encode memories correctly, leading to fragmented and unreliable recollections of traumatic events. And here's a real mind-bender. The more you tell a story, the more you might be reinforcing a version of it that's drifted from the original truth. Each retelling is another reconstruction, another chance for subtle details to be altered, embellished, or left out, until the memory becomes more of a well-rehearsed script than an authentic account. Our memories aren't static files in a cabinet, they're living, evolving narratives, and this dynamic nature makes them an inherent and unavoidable source of human error. Habits are honestly one of the brain's greatest energy-saving inventions. I mean, think about it. You don't have to consciously deliberate every step of brushing your teeth or driving your daily commute to work. These actions have been handed off to the basal ganglia, which is the part of the brain that takes care of automated routines. This frees up your prefrontal cortex, the thinking, decision-making part of your brain, to focus on more important things, like what to have for dinner or, the existential nature of reality. This automation is super efficient. It lets us handle the complexities of daily life without being paralyzed by a million tiny decisions. Basically, we're on autopilot. But here's where the danger sneaks in. When we're on autopilot, our conscious attention is kind of disengaged. The system works beautifully 99% of the time, but it's that remaining 1% that gets us into trouble. When a routine task has a small, unexpected variation, our automated brain often just doesn't notice. That's why you might find yourself driving to your old apartment after you've moved, or pouring orange juice into your cereal. Your habit-driven brain is running the morning routine script and just doesn't register the small change that needs conscious intervention. The very efficiency of the habit becomes its weakness, creating a vulnerability to what are often called slips or lapses. This is especially obvious in high-stakes professions that rely on repetitive procedures. Think about an airline pilot running through a pre-flight checklist or a surgeon performing a routine operation. They've done it hundreds, maybe thousands of times. That very familiarity can breed a kind of mindlessness, where they go through the motions without truly attending to them. That's when a critical step can be missed. The system is so routine that the brain checks it off mentally before the body has even finished the action. It's a paradox. The more expert we become at a routine, the more practiced our habits, the more susceptible we can actually be to making a simple, devastating mistake because our conscious mind has checked out. So far, we've been talking about the internal workings of our minds, our biases, our memories, our habits. But here's the thing, we don't make mistakes in a vacuum. We make them out in the world, surrounded by tools, systems, and environments that can either help us succeed or honestly set us up to fail. Hallinan really makes a powerful point that many errors we chalk up to human error are actually system errors. The mistake is often not a failure of the person, but a failure of design. A poorly designed door, a confusing software interface, or a badly lit workspace can all dramatically increase the chance of an error, even for the most careful and highly trained people. Take the classic example of the Norman door, named after design expert Don Norman. It's a door with a handle that makes you want to pull, but it's actually meant to be pushed. When you pull on a push door, you feel a little silly, but honestly, the mistake isn't yours. The door gave you a false signal. The design is to blame. Now imagine that concept on a bigger scale. Think about a medical device where two critical buttons are placed right next to each other and look exactly the same. Or a nuclear power plant control panel where the alarm for a coolant leak looks just like a dozen other, less urgent alarms. In these high-stakes environments, bad design doesn't just cause a little confusion, it can actually be catastrophic. That's why some of the biggest advances in safety haven't come from trying to make humans perfect, but from making our environments more forgiving. Aviation, for instance, learned this lesson the hard way. Cockpits now have forcing functions, like making it physically impossible to retract the landing gear while the plane is on the ground. Checklists, standardized communication, and well-designed controls all help create a system that anticipates human fallibility and builds in safeguards. So the real lesson here is this. Instead of just asking, who made the mistake? It's often way more productive to ask, what was it about the situation, the tool, or the environment that made this mistake more likely? By fixing the system, we can protect ourselves from our own built-in flaws. After this deep dive into the flawed and fascinating landscape of our minds, it might be tempting to feel a bit fatalistic. If our brains are so wired to be overconfident, to see what we expect, to misremember, to slip up on routines, and to be tricked by our environment, what hope do we really have? But honestly, that's exactly the wrong takeaway. The central, empowering message of Hallinan's work, and what I really hope you take away from this video, is that understanding is the first step to prevention. Knowing the predictable ways in which we fail actually gives us the power to build systems, both for ourselves and for society, that can help us avoid those failures. Forewarned is, in a very real sense, forearmed. And this isn't just some abstract theory, it translates into practical, genuinely life-changing strategies. Think of the airline pilot's checklist. We can totally use that same logic in our own lives. Making a complicated recipe? Use a checklist. Packing for a big trip? Use a checklist. It's a simple tool that takes some pressure off our unreliable working memory and helps keep our attention where it needs to be. We can also just learn to slow down. When you're facing a critical decision, taking a moment to pause and ask yourself, what might I be missing here? What are my assumptions? Can be enough to snap you out of autopilot and get your more analytical thinking online. And we can become advocates for better design in the world around us, realizing that confusing forms, websites, and products aren't just our fault for not getting it. Ultimately, the goal isn't to become flawlessly robotic. That would be profoundly inhuman. The goal is to become more graceful in our imperfection. It's about developing a humble awareness of our own cognitive blind spots and using that knowledge to move through the world with a bit more care and a lot more wisdom. As Joseph T. Hallinan so perfectly puts it, we make mistakes because we are wired to do so. The better we understand how we go wrong, the better we can avoid it. Thank you so much for watching.